It started with a slap. Loud, sharp, and unexpected. The kind of moment that makes bystanders freeze. It was a warm Tuesday afternoon in downtown Atlanta, Georgia. Traffic moved steadily. The sun was out. Everything felt normal. A black SUV with tinted windows slowly pulled into a gas station near Peachtree Street, just a few blocks from City Hall. Moments later, flashing blue lights lit up behind it. A police cruiser had followed the SUV and now blocked it in. The officer stepped out, Officer Mike Landon, a 10-year veteran of the force. His face was tense. His hand hovered near his weapon. He approached the vehicle with the kind of aggressive energy that says, "I'm in charge, and don't you forget it." Inside the SUV sat a black woman in her late 30s, dressed casually in jeans, sunglasses, and a fitted sweatshirt. Calm, collected, not panicking. She rolled down her window and said what any normal citizen might say. "Good afternoon, officer. May I ask why I'm being stopped?" But Officer Landon didn't like the tone. Or maybe he didn't like being questioned at all. "License and registration." Now he barked. Still calm, the woman responded, "I'll hand it to you. Just let me know the reason for the stop." That was it. That one sentence set something off in the officer. His tone sharpened. His eyes narrowed. You don't get to ask questions. You follow orders. Then, shockingly, and with no warning, he slapped her across the cheek. Not a gentle nudge. A full-on slap that echoed in the air and left a visible red mark on her skin. The gas station clerk, watching from behind the glass, later said it was so sudden he dropped the soda he was holding. People at nearby pumps turned and stared. Time seemed to pause. The woman slowly turned her head back toward the officer. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. Her voice remained steady, ice cold and full of something that made even Officer Landon take a step back. "Sir," she said, "you just assaulted a U.S. commander." For a split second, Landon looked confused. Then nervous. She reached calmly into her jacket and pulled out a restricted access military ID, the kind most people never see up close. It was marked with security codes and a Department of Defense seal. Her name, Commander Alicia Graves. She wasn't just military. She was a Delta Force commander, one of the most elite, covert, and highly trained soldiers in the U.S. Army. The kind of person who leads rescue missions in war zones, trains global counterterrorism teams, and whose identity is usually protected for national security reasons. And Officer Landon had just slapped her across the face during a stop she wasn't legally required to comply with in the first place. At this point, his face went pale. His body language shifted, the aggressive posture gone, replaced by awkward stammering. I didn't know, can we just step out and talk?" But the gas station had security cameras, and his own body cam had recorded everything. Within hours, that footage would go viral. But in that moment, right there on the street, people had already pulled out their phones. Passers-by were already whispering. Some were filming. Others simply stared in silence at the woman who didn't even raise her voice after being slapped. She didn't have to, because everyone could feel it. Something very serious had just happened. A line had been crossed. A mistake had been made, not just by a cop acting out of control, but by someone who let power and bias blind them to who they were dealing with. And this was only the beginning. Officer Mike Landon wasn't new to the job. He'd been wearing a badge for over a decade. But somewhere along the way, his duty to protect and serve had twisted into something else. A sense of unchecked power and a habit of acting without accountability. He had a history, not one officially written in charges or reports, but whispered among citizens and even fellow officers. A reputation for stopping young black drivers more often than others. A pattern of escalating minor situations into full-blown confrontations. And a personality that didn't take well to being questioned. So when he spotted that black SUV on Peachtree Street with dark window tints, his first instinct wasn't curiosity, it was control. He didn't radio in a traffic violation. He didn't follow standard protocol. He simply flipped on his lights and followed the car into the gas station. To him, this was routine. Another driver who, in his eyes, looked suspicious. Another person he expected to treat him like a king just because he wore a badge. But this time, The driver wasn't a teenager with a loud stereo or a nervous young man with expired tags. This time, it was Commander Alicia Graves, though he didn't know that yet. As he approached the SUV, the woman inside was calm, professional, and respectful. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't resist. All she asked was a basic question. What's the reason for the stop? But Officer Landon didn't like being questioned. And that's where the arrogance kicked in. He snapped back with commands. His voice got louder, more aggressive. He didn't offer a reason for the stop, which is required by law in most traffic encounters. Instead, he repeated license and registration. Now, the woman, maintaining her calm, repeated her question. She wasn't rude. She wasn't threatening. But Landon felt his control slipping. To him, this wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. It was a challenge to his authority. And when people challenge Officer Landon, he reacts. What happened next shocked everyone. The slap. A grown man, a law enforcement officer, slapped an unarmed woman during a non-violent, verbal exchange. It was raw, ugly, and completely unjustified. But to Landon, it was about showing dominance. He had no idea who she was. No idea that she had more discipline, strength, and training than he'd ever know. No idea that she could have dropped him to the ground in a second but chose not to. And no idea that his body cam was catching every second of his downfall. What makes this moment even more chilling is how quickly he tried to regain control afterward. The second she revealed her military ID, everything about him changed. Gone was the aggressive tone. Gone was the barking of orders. Suddenly, he was stammering, trying to talk his way out of a situation he created. I didn't mean it like that. We can talk this out. Ma'am, let's step over here. But it was too late. The slap had already happened. The camera had already recorded it. And more importantly, the world was about to see it. This wasn't just a bad day on the job. This was the kind of mistake that ends careers, the kind that sparks outrage, protest, and reform. All because one officer let his arrogance, bias, and unchecked power speak louder than the law he was supposed to uphold. And the woman he thought he could intimidate? He'd just made the biggest mistake of his life by underestimating her. To the world, she was just another civilian that day. A woman in jeans, a hoodie, and sunglasses. But behind that quiet exterior stood a warrior. Commander Alicia Graves had served the United States Army for over 17 years. She wasn't just military, she was elite. A Delta Force commander. One of the few black women to ever reach that level in the military's most secretive and specialized combat unit. A soldier who had been trained to endure torture, to lead rescue missions deep behind enemy lines, and to neutralize terrorist threats with the precision of a surgeon. But none of that was visible when Officer Landon walked up to her window, because she wasn't in uniform. She wasn't flexing her status. She was just living her life, off-duty, visiting family in Atlanta, trying to enjoy a few quiet days before heading back to a high-security base. And yet, despite her years of service, the medals she'd earned, the lives she'd saved, she was treated like a criminal for the simple reason that she fit a profile. The moment she was slapped, she didn't yell. She didn't fight. She didn't even reach for her phone. Instead, with calm, military precision, she opened her jacket and pulled out a sleek black card. It didn't look like any normal ID. It had a high-security hologram, a DoD seal, a clearance strip that glowed under UV light, and her name, Commander Alicia R. Graves, Special Operations Command. She handed it to the officer with one short sentence that dropped like a bomb. You just assaulted a United States Delta Force commander. Landon's eyes scanned the card. He blinked twice, realizing he wasn't looking at some forged ID or military surplus tag. This was real. This woman wasn't just someone important. She was someone whose very presence could trigger a national-level response if harmed. You could see the panic begin to spread across his face. He knew he had messed up, big time. He stuttered, tried to talk it out. Ma'am, I didn't know. This was just a misunderstanding. But it was too late. The calmer voice made it worse. I asked you a lawful question, she said, and your response was to put your hands on me. Commander Graves had been in war zones more dangerous than any American street. She had walked through IED-ridden fields in Afghanistan. She had led hostage recovery teams under the cover of darkness. She had sat in strategy briefings with generals, FBI leaders, and foreign intelligence agencies. And yet, here she was, slapped across the face in broad daylight on a U.S. street. Not by an enemy combatant, but by the very police force she'd spent her life protecting through her service. What's even more shocking, she didn't retaliate, because she didn't need to. Commander Graves understood something Officer Landon didn't. Real power doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to throw punches or pull rank. Real power comes from discipline, integrity, and knowing who you are, even when others don't. In that moment, she held more strength in her silence than the officer ever had in his badge. A few bystanders who had seen the slap started whispering. One man had already begun recording the exchange. Another woman recognized the seriousness of what just happened and called 911. Not to report Graves, but to report the officer. "You hit a military commander," she said into her phone, "and we got all on video." Commander Graves didn't need to raise her voice, didn't need to threaten. Her mere presence spoke louder than anything else. The cop who thought he was in control had just lost it completely. And the woman he tried to humiliate? She was about to teach him, and the world, what true leadership looks like. They say the camera doesn't lie. And in this case, it didn't just tell the truth. It told a story the entire nation couldn't ignore. Within 12 hours of the slap, Officer Landon's body cam footage was requested as part of the official protocol. But before the department could review or try to delay its release, a leaked clip, just 43 seconds long, hit social media like a thunderclap. The video showed everything. The sharp voice commands, the refusal to explain the stop, the dismissive body language, and then the slap. The unmistakable crack of his palm against her face, followed by a stunned silence. Then came the moment that truly changed everything. The woman, still composed, reached into her jacket and said the words the internet would never forget. "You just assaulted a United States Delta Force commander." Millions of viewers watched the clip in disbelief. By morning, it had exploded across Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. News headlines followed quickly. Cop slaps Delta Force commander during traffic stop. Atlanta officer assaults highly decorated military leader on camera. Commander Graves, the woman who changed the conversation. People couldn't believe it. Some thought it was fake. Others were simply stunned that a highly trained U.S. Special Forces leader could be disrespected like that in her own country, while unarmed, compliant, and calm. But what really hit home was this. If someone like Commander Graves could be treated that way, what chance did the average black woman have? Public outcry erupted. Protests formed outside the Atlanta Police Department within 24 hours. Activists, veterans, civil rights leaders, and ordinary citizens stood side by side, demanding accountability. Justice for Graves signs popped up across the city. Hashtags like hashtag respect black women and hashtag Graves deserves justice trended for days. Inside the police department, chaos quietly unfolded. Officer Landon had been placed on immediate administrative leave, but the pressure was growing. Department officials scrambled to prepare statements, but nothing seemed to calm the public. The footage was too clear, the facts too damning. Worse, reports started to emerge that this wasn't Landon's first complaint. Though he had no official charges on his record, internal whispers revealed he'd been reprimanded multiple times for aggressive stops and unprofessional conduct, especially during encounters with young black men and women. And now, with the world watching, the department couldn't just sweep it under the rug. Meanwhile, Commander Graves stayed silent. She refused interviews. She made no public appearances. The only message that came from her was a short, powerful press release from her unit's legal team. Commander Graves is focused on upholding the values she's sworn to protect. She trusts that justice will follow the truth. And the truth was everywhere. Clips of the footage were played on national TV. Experts debated it. Veterans wrote open letters of support. Military leaders privately expressed outrage. The story wasn't just about a slap anymore. It was about bias, power, and the consequences of judging someone by what they look like rather than who they are. Landon's defenders tried to spin the narrative. He didn't know who she was. She looked suspicious. It was a stressful moment, but the damage was done. The internet had made up its mind. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a reckless abuse of power. And while Commander Graves stayed quiet in the eye of the storm, the movement her experience triggered grew louder with every passing hour. Officer Landon had been trained to enforce the law, but what he failed to understand was simple. Respect isn't optional. And thanks to a body cam he likely forgot was running, the entire world now knew the truth. In full color, full sound, and full shame. The slap was over in a second, but the aftermath? It changed everything. In the weeks following the viral explosion of the body cam footage, the city of Atlanta found itself at the center of a national conversation. People from all walks of life, veterans, civil rights leaders, police reform advocates, military families, and ordinary citizens were demanding not just justice for Commander Alicia Graves, but serious accountability from a system that allowed someone like Officer Mike Landon to operate unchecked for so long. Protests grew larger. What started as a few dozen outside police headquarters grew to hundreds, then thousands. Marches filled the streets, not with anger alone, but with unity. Protesters chanted, "Her silence was strength. We salute Commander Graves. Protect, don't profile." Across social media, people shared stories of their own, being profiled, mistreated, or disrespected during stops that began exactly like the one Graves endured. The difference? They weren't Delta Force commanders. They didn't have a body cam video. They weren't believed. But now they had a voice. Because Commander Graves had become a symbol. Not because she fought back, but because she didn't need to. Inside the Atlanta Police Department, the pressure was boiling. An internal investigation launched immediately, but it wasn't enough. City officials, pushed by public demand and national scrutiny, brought in an independent civilian oversight board. Their findings were damning. Officer Landon had 7 prior use of force complaints. 3 involved black women. None were ever fully investigated. His supervisor had overlooked red flags in performance reviews. When these facts hit the news, the department couldn't hold back the flood. Officer Landon resigned, but not quietly. His resignation came just one day before he was expected to be terminated. He later tried to apologize through a lawyer, releasing a vague statement that said, "I regret how the situation unfolded and never intended harm." But for the public, and for Graves, it wasn't about intention. It was about impact. 3 weeks after the video went viral, the world finally heard from Commander Alicia Graves. She stood on the steps of the Georgia State Capitol in full dress uniform, ribbons, badges, and the unmistakable silver oak leaf that marked her as a lieutenant colonel. Flanked by fellow service members, community leaders, and her legal team, she delivered a short but unforgettable statement. "I have served in war zones where the enemy knew my name and hunted my team. I have worn this uniform in deserts, jungles, and mountains. I protected embassies, rescued hostages, and trained soldiers around the world. But nothing prepared me for being slapped on a street in my own country by someone who was supposed to protect it. I didn't speak earlier because I didn't want this to become about me. I wanted to be about everyone who's ever been treated unfairly because of how they look. I didn't need to use force. I didn't need to pull rank, because I knew the truth would speak louder than anything I could do in that moment." The crowd stood in silence, then broke into applause. It was powerful. It was raw. It was real. In the months that followed, the incident sparked reforms inside the Atlanta Police Department. Mandatory de-escalation training for all officers. A new complaint tracking system to flag repeat offenders. Civilian-led reviews of body cam footage for controversial stops. And perhaps most importantly, it triggered a wider national discussion. How many routine stops turn violent because of ego, bias, or fear? How often are people hurt simply for asking a question? And why is respect, basic human respect, not the default in encounters with authority? Commander Graves became a guest speaker at leadership conferences, veterans panels, and public safety reform events. Not to share her story for fame, but to remind others that restraint is power, and that courage isn't always loud. She refused every interview that offered money. She declined 2 book deals. Instead, she created a nonprofit called Silent Strength, dedicated to helping veterans transition into civilian life and training young people, especially women of color, in leadership, resilience, and self-advocacy. 1 year after the slap, a mural appeared in downtown Atlanta. It showed Commander Graves, not in uniform, not in combat gear, but as she appeared in that gas station parking lot, jeans, hoodie, calm expression, unbothered by the chaos around her. Underneath the painting, 6 words. You don't know who you're facing. A reminder to the world. Don't judge by appearance. Don't underestimate anyone. Because the quietest person in the room might be the one who's fought the hardest battles. And next time, it might not just be a slap. It might be a shift in history, led by someone the world tried to silence, but couldn't.